Thank you for stopping by. Spanky Gibson produces. It's good to see you all again. Really today I want to just come and talk to you guys about, I'll talk about some leadership principles, but with the current events going on around the country and a lot of things that we're seeing in the news and, you know, mudslinging rhetoric, all the things that come along with it, I want to talk about how leadership is or is not involved in those situations. Everybody's wanting to hold people accountable for decisions that they make, not fully knowing and understanding the deep-seated needs for maybe some of those decisions. We have a key principle called know yourself, seek self-improvement. And anyone can look at political leaders of today and they can go back 20, 30 years. They can see things that they said then, and they can see what they're saying now. And if those things are hypocritical, it's pretty important that you understand that they might have changed their leadership, they might have grown, or they might not have. Now, I think some of these leaders do it just out of pure hatred or anger, and they don't seem to appreciate the lack of power or something in that direction. Now, knowing yourself and seeking self-improvement is pretty important. As a young Marine, for me, I was kind of a turd, to be honest with you. I would do things that I should have never done. I didn't even think about the Marine Corps and making the Marine Corps look bad, and my unit. Definitely you have unit cohesion, and I would sometimes take away from that because I'd make stupid decisions and I would act out, or I would just being young and dumb. Now, we can't say that about certain political leaders today. Most of them aren't young and dumb. The ones that are, we can give them a little bit of leeway, but for the most part, if they've been there long enough, we should expect them, as being voted into their position, that they'll make the right decisions. And more importantly, they make the decisions based off who voted them in. Now, we have to see in Democrat and Republicans, there's pretty big polar opposition at this point. We've came to a point where it's either my way or the highway. Both sides are going to point at the other side and say they did something wrong. And then maybe all sides will point up to the president and say they're doing wrong. But we have to remember, no different than those political leaders, our number one political leader, the President of the United States, was also voted in by a majority of Americans. So having that inability to know yourself or even look at leaders either as they've progressed or not, or as maybe they've fallen back a bit on what they've said in the past. Most of us have seen that. It doesn't make a whole lot of stinking sense that you'd be saying one thing 10 years ago or 20 years ago and take a complete 180 on that and then start talking about something that you might have talked about for decades, and then all of a sudden, because one leader is in play and in the position to make those hard decisions, you go against them just because you don't like them. That makes no sense. We have this whole understanding of common sense. Everybody likes to use their words. They like to think that they use common sense, but so many people out here in the real world, the voters, or maybe not even voters, they don't use that common sense. Well, what happened to know yourself and seek self-improvement? You'll never fully agree with anybody. You might accept it and do something based off that acceptance, but there's never 100%, for the most part, buy-in, especially in politics. Now, in the military, it's the same way. For us as a leader and as a follower, you eventually have to understand that when you're given an order to do something, even if you disagree, you don't like it, it scares you or makes you angry, you do it. If you don't do it, then what happens? You get in trouble. And if you continue on that trend, well, you get kicked out or, moved around at best. So, excuse me. So I've been traveling, and I got back and had a funeral yesterday for a Marine that I went to high school with that's local here in my town. And it kind of really made me think. I'd been thinking for the last few days. I haven't shot a video in like 5 days, so I've been pretty busy. I was watching the news on YouTube And, I just started getting angry myself, kind of just thinking that I can look at all these different news organizations and mainstream media and see where they go really far one way and really far the other way. And then they start passing inappropriate information, or wrong information more importantly, and then it gets on X, it gets on YouTube, and it just starts flowing at a rapid rate, and it gets out here to all of us. And then 30 minutes later, well, no, that was wrong. This is what actually is going on. And then a couple hours later, even worse, rinse, repeat. And it really made me think about that because, where I want to talk more about leadership and all those things that I learned in my time and how I progressed forward and became more senior and a little bit better of a leader, it just made me think I need to talk about that combination of leadership and politics. My last 3 years in the Marine Corps, because being an above-the-knee amputee on active duty, I worked on Capitol Hill as a military legislative fellow for a year, and then a payback tour at the Pentagon, retired out of the Pentagon. And in 2009, first session of 111th Congress is when I was on the House Committee for Veterans Affairs. And it blew my mind. I didn't realize just how interesting politics was from the far outside. And then once I was a little bit on the inside, I saw the day-to-day workings, writing legislation, the whereas statements, doing everything, committee hearings, subcommittee hearings, negotiations, Affordable Care Act amendment, that we had to work with the Senate VA committees. And it's not the same as what you see on the news. Now, I'm not there now, and it obviously seems way worse than 2009 through 2011 when I was there. But I don't think the core aspect is any different. I feel that as political leaders that are voted to make a decision based on a percentage of those that voted them in, 50%, 60%, 70% above their competitor, they should listen to not only that percentage of individuals, but they still should listen to the opposing non-voting individuals, because you can't just help 51 or 60 or 70%. You also have that 30, that 40, or maybe that 49% that is still under your decisions. And I think that is about the distance I want to go with it, with the information. Know yourself, seek self-improvement is critical, no matter how long you stay in a job. For me, 20-some years. I had to continue to improve. I had to continue to not make the same mistakes I'd made before. Politicians, to me, should not be any different. Voters should not be any different. Do your due diligence. If you don't know something about somebody, you read up on them. You do a little bit of investigative work before you make a determination that you want to, go ahead and just, go to the polling booth and strike a decision. You might just assume I should vote Democrat or I should have to vote Republican because that's what everybody tells me to do. But then you find out that, one or the other might not be standing for what principles you stand for. And then also maybe neither one of them are. And you decide you don't want to do it and not vote at all. I think that's the worst thing someone could do. If you're going to know yourself and seek self-improvement, and you're going to walk away from something because it doesn't meet 100% of what you wanted to do, you need to step back and look beyond yourself. Look at the country as a whole. Look at your society as a whole. Look at your population base, your town, your county, your state, whatever. And you need to think that I should get out there and represent, because worst case is when someone doesn't vote and then all you do is see them on YouTube or X or other things and they're complaining about this, and then come to find out through a few questions and answers they don't vote. Well, that's as hypocritical as a lot of these individuals that are making decisions for us in Capitol Hill. And then we look back 20, 30 years and they said one thing for a long time, and then all of a sudden they're going, complete reversal, because they might not like our current leadership. So let's leave it at that. I think that's enough to give you some foods and thoughts for process. I appreciate you guys coming back here. You can follow me also at Spanky Gibson 71 on X. I hope you like these. If you would, please subscribe. Like it, do all the things that they tell you. Like, share, subscribe. Ding the bell and all the different things. But if you understand where I'm coming from, please throw some comments down there, because it's getting pretty aggravated at the polarization at this point. And yeah, I just think that we have a lot to say, and more of us need to say something. And I think we need to share the wealth on our feelings, whether you agree or disagree. And that's where the commenting process comes into play. You get on there and comment, I will get back to you. I'm retired, so I'll get back to you pretty quick, I hope. But yeah, give it some thought. Look at yourself. And if you've never voted and you're old enough to vote, get out there and vote. And I don't care who you vote for, what side of a political party, straight down the middle. It doesn't matter to me. I think it's important that every one of us, especially if we're going to complain about it, should do the due diligence to investigate who we're going to vote for, do some research on their background, especially if they've been in politics a long time. And, excuse me, we should stand by that. If we're going to complain, then do the action that you're going to complain about when it doesn't go in your favor. So, once again, know yourself, seek self-improvement. It's a key leadership principle. And if you want to watch some of my previous videos, it'll be up here in one of these directions, and pop up there and give it a like. And once again, if you would subscribe, follow me on Spanky Gibson 71 on X, and comment. And I will look forward to talking to you again. So I just want to thank you guys very much, and for being here. Good to see you all. Bye.